I never imagined that a simple knock on the door would explode into a neighborhood scandal that shattered complacency and ignited my resolve from the moment I heard the sharp smack echoing across the porch where my 7-year-old stood trembling under the afternoon sun. A flash of white-hot fury seized me as I saw Karen's hand recoil from my child's cheek, her face frozen in triumph. For a heartbeat I felt my heart stall before adrenaline surged through my veins, propelling me forward in a blur of motion. I yanked the door open and the world narrowed to her smug, towering silhouette, dripping entitlement like sweat from her brow. Without hesitation, I yanked my child back inside the threshold, slamming the door between us, and Karen's triumphant smirk morphed into a flicker of doubt as my son pressed his hand to his reddening cheek and whimpered, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. In that moment, every whispered warning I'd ignored about HOA Karen's escalating demands and petty cruelties slammed into my consciousness with brutal clarity, and I realized that today would mark the end of her unchecked reign of intimidation and the beginning of my strategic counterstrike. I steadied my voice despite the tremor rattling my chest and told my son to wait in the living room while I dealt with this myself. Stepping back into the foyer, I found Karen bristling like a wounded peacock, her chin jutting as she fixed me with those cold, superior eyes. I inhaled and calmly stated that her behavior was unacceptable, then watched her puff out her chest and counter with a venomous declaration that entitled her to discipline any child who dared ignore her precious community standards. As if her vanity trumped every law in the county, I cut her off mid-lecture, announcing that I had already consulted my lawyer before this encounter, and that a formal complaint had been filed for assault. Knowing the words would land like a thunderclap, Karen's expression flickered between fury and panic as I slid a crisp lawyer's business card across the threshold and recited in detail the statutes she had violated, then closed the door without another word. Her dazed face in the glass lingered there as I retreated down the hallway to comfort my son, who clung to me with tears streaking his dusty cheeks but relief already blossoming in his chest at the knowledge he was safe. As we held each other, the truth of her entitlement lay bare, and the neighborhood's veneer of civility splintered. Overnight whispers of what had happened ricocheted across lawns and through group chats until Karen found herself isolated, her usual allies tight-lipped, and her social media vanished as neighbors exchanged plaintive messages of disbelief and solidarity. By dawn, my inbox overflowed with apologies and offers of support. The community that once cowered in silence rallied behind us, and the reality of turning fear into action coursed through my veins like wildfire. In the days that followed, my lawyer filed suit not just for the assault on my child, but for a pattern of harassment that had haunted our cul-de-sac for months. Karen received a formal summons delivered by a sheriff's deputy, her once proud posture reduced to trembling fury as she realized the full weight of her actions would no longer slide under the radar. A surprise twist came in the form of our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, who emerged from her quietly supportive sanctuary clutching a stack of photos showing Karen's repeated trespasses into private yards. Armed with evidence of broken fences and stolen garden gnomes, she volunteered to testify, and her brave confession galvanized other victims who finally stepped forward. The court date loomed like a judge's gavel already poised to strike, and Karen's once blustering threats dissolved into frantic pleas for mercy. At the hearing, her reputation unraveled as witness after witness dismantled her lies until even she could no longer maintain the facade. In the hush after the verdict was read, the judge's ruling resounding with justice, my son's hand in mine trembled with triumph as we watched Karen lowered into stunned defeat, and the hush gave way to a cheer that rippled through the courtroom like thunder. And in that moment I realized that standing up for the vulnerable transcends any single incident and transforms fear into collective strength. So share your thoughts below. Do you believe true justice was served? In the weeks following the verdict, the rhythm of our neighborhood shifted from wary silence to vibrant collaboration as neighbors who once beat a hasty retreat at the sight of HOA Karen's Mercedes now greeted me with nods and smiles that carried the unspoken weight of shared triumph. Every morning children ran free between yards without fear of a self-appointed vigilante lurking behind trimmed hedges, and elderly couples resumed their evening strolls along sidewalks once patrolled by scowls and whispered threats. In my own home, peace settled like dust that had finally been allowed to rest, yet beneath the calm a fierce energy simmered because we all knew that real change demanded more than a court ruling. It required collective courage to rewrite the story of entitlement that had long defined our little cul-de-sac. Soon after the trial, my lawyer and I called a town hall-style meeting in the community center where once only HOA notices had been posted in sterile white envelopes. Now the room pulsed with a shared desire to transform grievance into action. One by one, neighbors stood and spoke of petty fines they had paid for minor cosmetic offenses, insults Karen hurled at them over dropped mail or borrowed tools, and the countless hours they'd spent tiptoeing around her capricious edicts. Tears welled in my eyes as Mr. Patel recounted how Karen had shut off his fountain after he refused to uproot his beloved rose bushes, and how at age 82 he'd meekly complied until finally, realizing that submission only fueled her tyranny. When I spoke, I shared my own fear on that fateful afternoon when I dashed out barefoot to defend my child, and felt the world tilt beneath me. If I hesitated a second longer, our story might have ended in tragedy, rather than justice. As speakers poured out their stories, the truth took shape like a phoenix rising from ashes. Entitlement thrives in silence but dies when faced with solidarity. We drafted a new charter that enshrined clear boundaries between homeowners, and the HOA board stripped away archaic community standards that had empowered a single bully and instituted transparent procedures for conflict resolution. By sunset, we had signatures from every household. In the days that followed, local reporters picked up the story of a neighborhood reborn from the wreckage of one woman's abuse, and readers across the region flooded our inbox with messages of solidarity and envy that such grassroots democracy could flourish in the shadow of entitlement. Emboldened by our success, other communities reached out for advice on how to dismantle similar power imbalances, and I found myself speaking at civic forums, sharing legal strategies and emotional truths about the corrosive impact of unchecked authority. Meanwhile, Karen retreated to a rented apartment on the far side of town, her grand home under foreclosure and her reputation in tatters. She attempted to post online defenses that nobody read and mailed desperate letters to the local paper that never saw print. Without the veneer of the HOA's imprimatur, her once commanding presence shrank until even the mailman refused to deliver her complaints, instead rerouting them to my mailbox with a knowing nod. But even in her absence, a final twist emerged when the county attorney announced an investigation into the misappropriation of HOA funds under Karen's watch, revealing that she had siphoned thousands of dollars earmarked for community projects into personal accounts. The revelation sent shockwaves through City Hall and prompted sweeping reforms that now require annual audits and third-party oversight for any homeowners association receiving more than $5,000 in dues. That outcome, unforeseen when I drafted the assault complaint, underscored how one act of courage can unravel a tangled web of deceit and injustice. As my son and I walked past the newly installed community garden paid for by restitution funds and inspired by our fight, I saw his small hand grip mine and his eyes spark with pride, because he understood that standing up once had changed everything for us and for countless others. Now, when I look back on that sunlit afternoon when entitlement slapped my child and I chose to transform rage into resolve, I realize that true justice demands both accountability and compassion, because while Karen's downfall delivered a hard-earned victory, it also offered a cautionary tale that power without empathy corrodes community. To anyone who hesitates before confronting wrongdoing, remember that silence is complicity and fear is a gift you owe to no one. Share your verdict. Was this the justice my family and neighborhood deserved?